Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Queer Careers video podcast, where we put a spotlight on LGBTQIA+ talent and inspire people to reach their career and development goals. Thank you for watching or listening. I am Marie-Charlotte Coury, Development Chair for Pride Inclusion Business Group, an employee resource at Expedia. I am a white woman with green eyes, brown hair. I wear big aviator-shaped glasses, a purple sweater, and a green jacket today. Today, I am honored to be with Kathy Martinez, Vice President, Disability and Inclusion, and we both have a background picture in the rainbow, where travel with pride is written on top, as well as the number 1 with the words community, family, pride in one of the corners. And in the other 2 corners are the Queer Careers logo and a little cozy workstation with some rainbow colored elements. So Kathy, this is the most I'm gonna talk today. Over to you.
Thank you, Marie-Charlotte. My name is Kathy Martinez. I am Latina or Latinx, depending on the generation. I have salt and pepper hair with the salt winning out. I'm wearing a dark purple sweater with a silver necklace. And I am blind, just so people know why I cannot focus on the camera. And that is me. You'll be hearing more about me in a few minutes.
Do you want to share a little bit more, brief introduction, and tell us a little bit more about you before we skip to the questions?
Sure. Well, I've been at Expedia for almost exactly 4 months now. As I said, I'm blind. I was born blind. My passion has been economic empowerment for people with disabilities. So I'm also older. A shout out to the older folks who are still working, but my passion is really to work in a variety of settings to increase the capacity of our workplaces throughout the globe to better support people with disabilities, people with all kinds of disabilities. So I have worked in the government, I've worked in the private sector, and I've worked in the nonprofit sector. And I'm very happy to be at Expedia. I think this is the right place for me to be right now, to work on both improving access for travelers with disabilities and also for increasing representation of people with disabilities amongst our employees.
Yeah, and you're doing definitely an inspiring job. And every time I hear you speak, I'm actually impressed because when you introduced yourself and you said like all the things that you've already done in your career, it just blows my mind. So thank you for doing everything that you're doing.
Well, it's my pleasure.
So the first question would be about describing your role.
My role is a new role. As I said, I've been here for 4 months. The purpose of my work is to really increase our capacity to support and welcome people with disabilities on a global level. And that includes our physical assets, our digital assets, and our culture. So I work with the folks in our facilities group, in our product and tech group, as well as, I'm on the I&D team. I'm on Michael Davis Velasco's team. And so, we really focus on how we can weave people from underrepresented groups into our culture. And for people with disabilities, it's really more about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's also about access. So I like to say it's about DEI and A, because access is a real critical part of it. We have to get access right in order to make our workplace more welcoming and and allow productivity for people who are disabled, and enable them to do their work and thrive in our company.
Absolutely. And what do you know now you wish you would have known earlier in your career in general?
Well, I forgot a completely other part of my job, so I have to go back and I will answer that question.
We can definitely go back.
Okay, so another part of my job is the external side. So it is also in my job description to work with our product and tech teams and our E4B team to make the travel experience for people with disabilities a more welcoming experience. And, we want to make it a positive experience. We know that people with disabilities, the aging population is growing, and age is the largest reason why people become disabled. So really, we want our travelers to have a great experience from throughout the whole trip cycle, right? From when they're planning their trip, we want our websites to be accessible so that they can have choices. But we also want them to know what they're getting when they choose a hotel or a VRBO home. We want them to know that it's going to be what they expect. So the other part of my job is to work with product and tech, E4B, on making the travel experience more welcoming and accessible.
Absolutely. If the first part wasn't enough, you also have all these things to work on. So you're definitely amazing. So the second question was, what do you know now you wish you would have known earlier in your career?
I think I'm in my 60s, just to be very honest. So I'm pretty old. I think what I know now is that there is, people are very interested in expanding their mindset around disability. As a younger worker, I felt like people were not open to it, and maybe they weren't, in the 70s and 80s as much as they are now. But what I wish I know now is what I wish I knew then that I know now is that we have to meet people where they are. And the other thing I wish I knew then is that nothing is perfect, right? We have to go for progress over perfection.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. And the meeting people where they are, it's like better to take one step than taking no step because you're assuming like they're not ready, right?
Right. People are, I really believe that people want to do their best. And, I think as a younger employee, I was too impatient. And I wanted things to change overnight, and that's just not how things go, especially, in disability, in many parts of the world, or in all parts of the world, I should say, people really are not used to seeing people with disabilities in the workplace. So it does take time. And I think, people, we have to allow people to ask questions so that people learn how things are done. That's really what I think people are interested in. It is the what, right? The what is important. But so often I get questions as a blind person, well, how do you actually do your job? And how do you read your 300 emails a day? And how do you get to the airport? And, so people are they're curious, and curiosity in my mind is one of the best attributes a person can have, because that means that they're constantly learning and interested in learning. So I think, really understanding that people have to learn. We all don't know everything, and it would be really boring if we did. So I'm very, I think I'm in a very good place in terms of meeting people where they are, working to, devise and help our learning teams develop trainings and programs, which are a means to an end, which, help people feel comfortable, and really expand our talent pool at Expedia, and also our traveler pool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you with the curiosity. It opens like limitless opportunities. If you're curious in life, you're going to have so much advantage according to not being so. And for the record, Kathy is the fastest person to answer to the emails. Like she's one of the busiest person that I got in touch for this initiative with, and she's definitely very fast at replying to the emails. So the third question would be, what helped you to get this particular job, and what do you think makes you successful in it?
Well, I wasn't looking for a job when I was called. The thing that really helped me is realizing, I'll tell you one thing. It was the motto that Expedia has, or the tagline, travel is a force for good. And I have been an avid traveler for my whole life. When I was 18 years old, many years ago, I had the luck to go to take a youth exchange program trip to Japan for 8 weeks. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I mean, it was terrifying. I hadn't ever been out of the country except for to Mexico. But, Japan was a very different culture than California, where I grew up, and New Mexico, where I spent my summers. And it really gave me, it gave me the travel bug and the interest in learning about other cultures. And I was so fascinated to learn about how, what did the Japanese do with, how did they handle people with disabilities? And this was in the 70s. So just remember, it's a long time ago. But, that really gave me the bug to realize that travel is a force for good. So it was time for me to move on from my last job. And I think that I felt like I could do something. I could really contribute to, the goal of the I&D team. And what makes me successful is people like you and people who are interested in learning about how to weave disability into our tools, our product and tech tools, and how to weave disability into our employment life cycle. So that means, where do we find people with disabilities? How do we convince them that we're a good company to work for? How do we accommodate our workers, both current and upcoming workers? How do we support them if they have a temporary disability? So my success depends on so many teams that I'm currently working with who have the passion to make Expedia a more inclusive place.
I love your answer. And between the pregnancy hormones and everything, you're going to make me emotional. So thank you for saying that, and just know like it's no effort on my side, or I think on the side of many people, getting to be curious and getting to be more inclusive, because if it enables us to count on the talent from people like you, I think it's worth 1,000, 1,000,000 times.
The other thing to say here is, we are not just one identity. I happen to be gay.
Yeah.
I am, Latina or Latinx. I'm a partner. I have a partner who doesn't happen to be disabled, at least not yet. I have a son, so I'm a parent. Although my son is quite older. I mean, he's a man. But I think we have to remember that disability is a natural part of the human condition. Most people who are disabled acquire their disabilities. Most people are not born with a disability like me. And we have to also remember that not all disabilities are evident or obvious. I think it's like 60 or 70% of the disability population have non-evident disability. So I think what I want to say here is that we are multiple, we are complicated human beings, and we are not just one identity. So the fact that I'm blind is one part of me, but the fact that I've been gay since I came out when I was 18, much to my parents' dismay, but they got over it, and they love my son and my various partners, and so So we all have a variety of identities that we have to balance. And so, you know, my blindness is one part of who I am.
Absolutely. And we're going to get back to your identity before we close the podcast. So save a little bit for the end, because it's very, very interesting, actually. The next question is about the resources. So what are the resources that help you evolve in your career? So queer community, IBGs, LGBT job boards, networks, book, podcasts, e-learning, mentoring people. Just tell us, what is your perfect mix or your magic recipe?
Well, when I was coming up in my career, there was most things were not accessible. And that includes everything about, you know, job boards. Since, you know, honestly, since technology has evolved, I have had more access to information. So as a blind person, my issue is, you know, access to information. And when I was starting work in the early 80s and you know, in 90s, before computers, it was very difficult. So my biggest asset was people, and, you know, the fact that people saw something in me, and mentored me and gave me chances and you know, allowed me to make mistakes, which I think is something that we have to do. I mean, I certainly screwed up many times in my career, but I learned from it, and I had people who called me out when I was, you know, not doing things the way they should have been done, or, you know, if I made a mistake. So for me, you know, now job boards are more accessible. There's LinkedIn, of course, which is pretty darn accessible. There's even Indeed, and other job boards are more and more accessible. But also, I think that corporations and governments and NGOs, they're understanding the value of bringing people with disabilities into the workforce, not just at entry-level positions, but at all levels of the workforce, you know, and especially in leadership. I've noticed that more and more people are coming out as having a disability in various C-suites around the world. And so I think my biggest asset has been people themselves, and people's interest, not only in helping me, but in helping other people with disabilities. And other people who might be queer or women, or, you know, people from underrepresented groups, to have a shot at a leadership position, or at, you know, just something that would move their career forward.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm glad to hear that, because it means, like, if you give a shot to people, then you see the greatness in people like you and what you're accomplishing, and look what you have accomplished already, like in so many institutions, and changing a lot of stuff for people with disabilities, and advancing in the queer space, in the multiple layers of your identity, really. So it's amazing. And yeah, the mentoring, like, it comes up in every interview so far, the human part, like the making yourself available for others, and just having people trust in you in the career in general. I think it's something that we all need.
And then you have to pay it forward. Like, I'm at the age, I heard an expression once, earning, learning, and returning. And I think, you know, I'm in the place now where, of course, I'm still wanting to earn and learn, but I see it as my duty as an older person who, you know, was able to learn from others and get a break from others, and, you know, get a chance to succeed. It's my duty to pass it on, or pay it forward, however you want to look at it.
Absolutely. And I think if we all apply this motto, it's going to be very rewarding, because we're going to build a very strong society, community, where everybody can learn from everybody, and that would definitely be inclusive and amazing.
Correct.
So
yeah.
It's very good, because you mentioned, like, hardship or screwing up. So it ties perfectly to our next question, because who didn't? who didn't screw up. So could you share the biggest learning you had from an obstacle?
Oh, there's been so many. I mean, one thing we have to remember is that adversity is a teacher. We can see it as a barrier, which it can be, but it's also a teacher. And so, I think I've certainly been faced with my share of adversity in terms of people doubting me or people, kind of dismissing me as, a non, in some cases, a non-human. I think one of the biggest, learning experiences of my life was when I was first in the international development arena, and I came to, it was in the early 90s, and I was with a group, and we had developed these plans. We had gotten a grant to work in Russia, and the biggest mistake was we didn't know what the heck we were doing. And when I got there, I just realized these plans are going to go completely out the window, because the context in which we made the plans and the context in which we had to execute the plans were like night and day. So it was a big learning as an American, who was going abroad and trying to lift the boat of people with disabilities in other countries. That I was just that things were super different and are super different for people with disabilities in other parts of the world, and we have to learn that, and it really changed my whole way of leading, because then I just thought, what, these guys have to be the leaders, not us. We can't come in and tell somebody what to do. We have to understand as much as we can, where they're at. Again, kind of taking people, where they're at, and let them lead. And I completely changed my whole, vision of how I led and what was important. And I worked for the Namibian government in 1997. So when I went into Namibia, I had that learning that I learned in a very, kind of a big slap in the face from Russia. So, we planned very differently how we would work with, the disabled, primarily women at that time in the Namibian government, how we'd work with them, to help them become leaders, and work with the press, and work with other veterans groups, and work with their government that was just being formed. And so that was a big learning experience for me, because, we think we go in and we know this, and this is what you guys should do. And it was like not happening at all. So yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So what I'm getting from your experiences that you're sharing is that no matter where you're at and what you think you already know, you always have to be open and humble and just ready to learn from others, right?
Humility is a big part of the equation. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree 100%.
Yeah.
Now we're getting to your identities question. So you have shared being Latinx, you have shared being blind, a woman, a lesbian. How have your intersectional identities influenced your journey?
Well, that's a good question. Clearly, people see me as blind first. So when somebody sees me, and I usually carry a white stick, or I'm holding onto somebody's elbow to be guided, they see me like say, "Oh, that person's blind." So typically, they don't. Well, I guess you could tell I'm Latinx. I don't know. Some people say yes, some people say no. I don't know. Certainly, people typically when they see me, they don't identify me as a lesbian. So at the first part of my career, I did not come out. However, I decided in, about 30 years ago, that if I was on a government panel, a government board for the Republican Party, and I was, and they were very, anxious to get me on the board. And I told them, look, I just think you guys should know, for, whatever it's worth, that I am gay. And my roommate at the time was my partner. And they said, well, okay, that's okay, as long as you don't, broadcast it. So I said, okay, I won't broadcast it, but if somebody asks me, I'm not going to lie. So, besides being out in the disability community, which I was, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, so it's easier to be a lesbian here than in many other places in the world. So I was lucky because I had a good gay support system, both disabled and non-disabled friends. But when I came out, I decided I was not going to lie about who I was anymore. That was a big turning point for me. So it was fine. Everybody's like, if they asked, I told them, and if they didn't. And then when I worked for the Obama administration, I was absolutely, completely out. And I think, we have to balance our identities. I'm, very interested in issues impacting, my Latinx identity, as well as other identities. I think it's important to, to just acknowledge that we are a complicated, all of us are, complicated, contradictory humans, and there's many contradictory sides in all of us, but we have to honor who we are and the different parts of us. So I do my best to balance. I'm lucky because I can be out in where I live. So I just have to say that is a privilege. And, I don't take it for granted. But I also respect people who are unable to come out, for whatever reason. Anyway, that kind of did ramble.
No, it's true. It's like you clearly expressed the visible parts of our identities and the immediate impact that it can have, so people start to make assumptions and everything. And there are the parts that you can choose to share or not. And this can trigger also all sorts of other dynamics, other assumptions or not. But in your case, what strikes me in what you're saying in the whole interview is like, you used all your intersectional identities to make the most of it, to serve the people who share those identities, to make everybody's better at the end, So I really admire that. I think it's very inspiring, and you make it your passion, and yeah, you're just serving other people with those identities.
I feel like I did not choose to be gay. I did try to have, I did have boyfriends who were wonderful, I will say. I just was not, that was not my, that was not my thing. So I feel like it was not a choice for me, because I tried to be ungay, if that's a word, when I was younger, and it wasn't about the men. I will say, in all fairness, the boyfriends I had were phenomenal. They were wonderful men, but I just was not. That was not the direction I was going.
Yeah, the heart wants what it wants, right?
Right, exactly. Yes.
Definitely. I agree.
Yeah.
So
but I know some people think, if you're lesbian, you're anti-man. That is, or man or male or man. That is not me.
No, yeah, that is not true. It has nothing to do. One thing has nothing to do with the other.
Exactly.
There are very heterosexual women who are very anti-men. I can tell you.
Totally right. I wasn't going to say it, but
no, yes. That's true.
It is so true. Yeah,
well, that's true. Because they didn't have the wonderful experiences that you had with men. All the contrary. So it's absolutely unrelated.
Correct. And I have a son. When you have a son, you really do. I was never avid anti-man. Of course, I'm anti-misogyny, but anyway, but I have a son, and I thought my goal as a parent is to raise a wonderful person, a wonderful man. Yeah. And he is, and he doesn't happen to be gay. And when he was 13, he sat me down and said, "Well, Mom," and with my partner, his other mom, who passed away a while back, but he said, "I just want you guys to know that I'm not gay." And we're like, "Well, we know." He's so not gay. And I think he felt like he was supposed to be gay at that young age of 13, but he's not. And I said, "Well, honey, my parent, I had to, you know, my parents aren't gay and I had to tell them I'm gay. Anyway, we had quite a conversation, but he was quite young. And so, you know, it was great that he felt like he could talk about it.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing this personal aspect of your life also. It's nice to hear. And I'm sorry for hearing from your partner.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, it was very sad.
So unfortunately, we're getting to the end of the interview. So I'm going to ask you the last question, which I think is very, very interesting. What percentage would you attribute to luck? And which percentage would you say is merit and effort related?
Oh my goodness. I've heard this question asked somewhere. Okay. You know, I would say, so luck meaning that, you know, you're in the right place at the right time. You know, you walked left instead of right. I would say that, I guess I would say like 30% luck, 70% effort, because it has been a lot of effort. You know, a lot of what I do is change mindset, change attitude. No matter the laws that are passed, you cannot legislate attitude, right? So changing minds has been, in my mind, some serious effort, but I've also had a considerable amount of luck too. In the people who I've worked with, the people who've supported me, the people who've called me out for doing something, you know, that wasn't so great. So I guess I would say 70% effort, 30% luck.
Amazing. Thank you. So we understand the 30% is your partner, your son, all your mentors, the wonderful people that you've met along the way, and everybody who is contributing and going along with all your.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's also the fact that I'm living in a time of, now, okay, now you're making me rethink this. I'm living in a time where there's technology. I mean, where, you know, I'm living in a very privileged time for people with disabilities because, you know, even 30, 40 years ago, there's so much we could not do because we couldn't see. And I'm just talking about me, right? You know, there's so much people who are wheelchairs users couldn't do because there was no ramps. There was just no thought that there was talent there that was being wasted. So maybe I should say 60-40. Now you're making me rethink this because I happen to be born in a time where technology has allowed me and medical advancement has allowed many people with disabilities to live longer and to live really productive lives.
But again, it's a retroalimentation, I think, because it's thanks to people who advocate
Correct.
For advancement that you have this kind of technological advancement, medical advancement, and everything. So yeah, I guess a thing, you know, relates to the other. So yeah, it's a very good answer. Thank you for sharing. So thank you, Kathy, again. Like, I've been honored to have this conversation with you and to share more time with you and get to know you better. And thank you for trusting like everybody to hear your story. And I hope we have a lot of visibility and everybody gets to hear all the amazing things that you're doing. And yeah, thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
Have a great day.